Welcome into this very special edition of the Louisville Bats podcast. Thanks so much for being with us. Celebrating the 25th anniversary of Louisville Slugger Field here in the year 2025, and perhaps no one more instrumental in getting this ballpark built. And the first game here back in the year 2000, maybe no one more influential in having that come to fruition than the former mayor of the city of Louisville, Jerry Abramson. He joins us on the podcast today. My name's Nick Curran. Thanks so much for dialing us up, however you have found us via YouTube, perhaps SoundCloud, or several other places to get your podcast. But a very special edition today, of course. Louisville Slugger Field opened back on April 12th of 2000. The Bats taking on the Norfolk Tides, then the AAA affiliate of the New York Mets, the Bats, the River Bats at the time. And just what a great day and a long time coming. And, you know, this ballpark being built, then opening to the public. We've heard in past episodes with Gary Ulmer, for instance, the former Bats president, about the pressure of trying to get this place open, and some people saying, hey, maybe we should move in mid-year and it won't quite be ready to go for opening day. But Gary was insistent that it was ready for opening day, and it was. And what a great night that was, and has only grown from there. But a really cool chance to look back with this being the 25th anniversary of the ballpark, and releasing this as the Bats are celebrating a 25th anniversary night with some of the past on-field folks that have been so influential from the River Bats days here. We talked to a man more behind the scenes. Jerry Abramson, of course, served two different stints as the mayor of Louisville. He earned the nickname Mayor for Life, was in office from 1986 through 1999, then again from 2003 to 2011, served as the lieutenant governor of the state of Kentucky as well. But during that first stint as mayor, really influential in helping bring everything, all the moving parts that needed to come together for this ballpark open. He was certainly one of the key figures in doing that, was a big part of it on opening night. Was not in office when this ballpark opened, but threw out a first pitch on that night, and certainly is someone who still a plaque down at the entrance to the suite lobby down here can see him because of all the work he did in getting this place built. There was a lot of questions about whether old Cardinal Stadium at the fairgrounds should be renovated, or if there should be a new ballpark downtown. Questions about whether something in downtown Louisville would be viable. There were just a lot of voices on both sides, and Mayor Abramson was very much of the mindset to bring this place here and have this vision come to life and sort of spark downtown and be a catalyst for activity down here, which Louisville Slugger Field certainly has been. So without further ado, we'll let you hear from the mayor for life of the city of Louisville and his memories of all that went into making Louisville Slugger Field a reality in the planning and the a lot of the sort of red tape and political backdrop for it. Here is the Louisville Bats podcast with Jerry Abramson. And great to have the former mayor of Louisville, Jerry Abramson, with us now. Sir, how are you? Thanks for doing this.
Doing great, Nick. Thanks so much for inviting me and sitting here as I have for games over the years, but sitting here on a beautiful day looking out over the field. It's just a very special venue and a very special opportunity for our community to have this wonderful space and team in our hometown.
Well, I figured no better person to talk to for this than you. You know, we're here on a mid-October, chilly day, but a beautiful one overlooking the field here in the Stadium Club as we record this. Start with this, just what sort of feelings do you get just walking back in here when you get a chance to make it in?
Well, it just brings back so many memories. I mean, you know, I had the dream. I'll tell you how it all came about. In 1986, I had a friend of mine in Baltimore who knew the mayor, and the mayor was a guy named William Donald Schaefer. And he was the dean of mayors at the time. And I was just a kid coming in as mayor, 36, 38, something like that, years of age. And he said, I can get you with William Donald Schaefer for the day if you want to shadow him. And I said, I'd love to do that. This was maybe a month before I went into office. I'd already won the election. So I went to Baltimore, and I'm shadowing him. And I brought as a gift to give to him to say thank you for giving me your time, a baseball bat that Louisville Slugger baseball bat that said William Donald Schaefer, Mayor of Baltimore. So it just happened to be the day where there was an article in the Baltimore newspaper, the Baltimore Sun, that some group was they were looking to locate a new baseball park in Baltimore. And some group was trying to physically locate it outside the city in a suburban setting. So he said, I've got a press conference coming up on baseball. He said, why don't you come with me and give me that baseball bat that you brought with you? And I said, well, Mayor Schaefer, of course, here's the bat, and I'm following you. So he gets up there, and he's in the press conference, and he says, so-and-so group is talking about moving the location. He said, we're going to build it in Baltimore. It's going to be a unique facility, obviously Camden Yards. And he said, and then he grabbed the baseball bat, and he said, if anybody wants to disagree with me, this is what I'm going to use to get their attention. Well, the place went crazy, as you can imagine. And then he took me out to Camden Yards to the old factory that was just sort of sitting there and in the middle of a pretty tough area. And I thought, wow, this is really special. He said, yeah, we're going to have a state-of-the-art baseball park, but you're going to walk through this great old factory, and it's really special. So a couple of weeks later, I'm driving down Main Street, going to City Hall. I look over to my right, and I see what I always called this a trolley barn. I think it was I'm not sure it was originally, but that's what I always called the entryway now that was owned by Brenly Hardy. And I said, that's the place we ought to locate it. And it would be a catalyst for the surrounding area to develop. And it would create an opportunity for a lot of excitement because the Redbirds were just knocking it out of the park, out of the fairgrounds, except it was at the Fairgrounds Stadium, which was not a very good baseball park. I said, I don't know who owns the building. And behind it was a scrapyard. And I said, I do know who owns the scrapyard because we've been having a difficult conversation with them over the years about relocating. We wanted to help them relocate either up the river or actually we prefer down the river below the lock and dam. I said, that's where we ought to do it. And from that day forward, which was like 86 to breaking ground in 98, I went about trying to piece this thing together. We had to buy this building, but the owner, Brenly Hardy and Jane Hardy, who was the president, they owned the building they owned the manufacturing across the street. They were making their garden tools and things like that on the south side of Main Street, and this was more of a warehouse that they were using it as. And so she didn't want to move. They were quite happy. Life was good. But if we were going to move them, she was willing to at least discuss it. At the same time, we were trying to figure out what to do with the scrapyard. The family that owned the scrapyard had been battling the city for a long time. And what we finally decided to get the scrapyard out of this area was that the largest piece of business that they had was chopping up train cars. I mean, they had a scissor that was humongous in size, and it would just cut through old train cars.
Wow.
And to get the train cars to their property here, which is now the beautiful baseball field that I'm looking out at toward the river, they had to come across Preston Street on the rail line. And guess who owns Preston Street? The people of the city of Louisville. And so we notified them that we were going to pull up the train track across Preston Street because we didn't think it was appropriate any longer for people to have to ride over it and bump over it, etc. And they said, well, that's literally going to shut us down because the biggest piece of our business is chopping up these railroad cars that we bring in on the railroad line. To which we said, well, then we'd like to help you relocate. So we did that, and we paid them a premium for them to relocate. And then we, in our negotiations with Brenly Hardy, we paid them a premium because they didn't want to move. And, it was a thriving business, successful business. It continues to be, as best I know. And we had to buy both sides of the street. I didn't particularly need the south side of Maine, but I certainly needed the north side to build the baseball park. So it was many years of negotiations, and then we had to go out and find how we're going to pay for this thing. And I remember sitting down with Jack Hilrick and number one saying to him, we ought to think in terms of calling the baseball team the Louisville Sluggers. And he was very uneasy about that because there had been a newspaper article about a Major League Baseball player who had gotten into trouble regarding, I can't remember what, but all over the press was the name of the team that the baseball player played on. And he said, I don't want to besmirch the image of Louisville Slugger just in case somebody who plays on the team it gets into some difficulty. So I said, well, what about the ballpark? So we could call it, Slugger Field. We could call it Slugger Park. We could call it Louisville Slugger, whatever you want to call it, for the appropriate number of millions of dollars.
That's right.
We'll be more than happy to put your name on the park. And so we worked with him on that. At the same time, we were working with him to bring Louisville Slugger back from Indiana. If you remember, they left Preston and Jacob and moved to an industrial park in Indiana, which got to be really embarrassing with my friends and relatives who came to visit and wanted to go to the see a baseball bats made. And I would always say, no matter what day it was, it's closed. We can't go, because I'd be darned if I was going to take them over the bridge to an industrial park where the Louisville Slugger bats were made. And so we were negotiating the deal to bring them back, because we had bought the old tobacco warehouse and on that corner where they are now located.
Sure.
On Main and what's that, 7th or 8th?
8th, I believe.
Yeah, and then we built a parking garage behind it to help them out to make the decision to move. So we had all this stuff going on, when as we worked toward building this ballpark, we reached out to HNTB and K. Norman Berry locally to design it. Sam Ragaswamy was the architects. And they took us on visits to some of the most recently built parks to see the goods, the bads, and the things that didn't work. We went to Rochester, we went to Salt Lake, there was a third one, I can't remember where.
Did you go to Indianapolis? Well, maybe Indianapolis wasn't quite ready by then, but that opened in the middle of '96. I know that was.
Maybe we did. Yeah, maybe we did.
I know Buffalo was one I read about as well.
That's right. We did go to Buffalo. We didn't go to Rochester. I'm wrong. We went to Buffalo. And we saw the importance of having an opportunity for folks to be able to walk all the way around the facility. We saw the importance of having it small enough that it would be give people a real connection to the field, which is why we decided to go with 13,000 to really build a real jewel park. We decided to do the boxes, and we went out and got most of the companies in town to take a box. At that time, I don't know what they cost today, but it was $25,000 commitment for the box. And we learned architecturally in terms of where to put the concessions. And a little bit later on, after we had already opened, when I brought he's now 32 years old. He was like 5 or 4, and once he finished Cotton Candy and Snowballs, I don't know what to do with him. So we talked about building a play area for the children in a location where a parent could keep an eye on their kid, but also watch the ball game, and that's what ultimately evolved into the playground area. So long and short of it is, it was the vision thing, as I guess H.W. Bush used to talk about the vision thing. It was the vision thing of having this downtown, the vision thing of using it as a catalyst for economic growth around it, which has certainly occurred in terms of commercial and real apartments and things of that nature, restaurants and bars, and to also ensure that this would be an experience for families. Unfortunately, there's lots of exciting things to do, in this community, but unfortunately many of them are cost prohibitive to certain level of income families. And so we wanted to make sure that this stayed as inexpensive for a family of four as possible. And, that was what we felt at that time. And we broke ground in 98. And we threw the first pitch out in maybe 2000.
April 12th of 2000.
Yeah, which was really exciting. It was just really exciting. I was so fired up because people, here's what you learn when you're in a position like mayor. If you spend taxpayers' money and it's a success, nobody ever asks you what it cost. If you spend taxpayers' money on a project and it's a failure, buddy, they string you up on a flagpole.
Every dime.
So I had my heart in this. I had my commitment of my administration in this. There were a lot of people who didn't think this location was a good location. There were a lot of people that kept wondering why the parking lot was so small. And I kept reminding folks that there's parking on the street and access to the waterfront that we had been developing would be a plus. And long and short of it is, at least from my perspective, it's been quite successful.
No doubt. Still enduring and still great to this day. It's interesting, was reading about Camden Yards and Baltimore and how that was sort of an inspiration. And it's funny that it goes all the way back to 1986. Didn't realize it went back that far. And I know, you were elected mayor and Operation Brightside, a big initiative and sort of beautification projects and Waterfront Park along with that. Was this kind of in the back of your mind coming here as all of those things were coming on board and online as well?
The dream was to, again, I go back to getting the baseball team out of the fairgrounds. It just wasn't conducive for baseball, in my judgment. And look, I'm a local kid. I went to, I was a member of the Knothole Gang out on Eastern Parkway when the Colonels played at Parkway Field.
Sure.
So I go back, and so the interest of taking this area from a beautification and enhanced quality of life, this was not a very successful part of the downtown. And so the hope was that this would be the catalyst. We were, as I remember, we were 1 mile from the Belvedere, from 5th and Broadway.
Makes sense.
And it was 1 mile. And so the thought was that you'd have people that could walk from work, because lots of people were working downtown at that time. The thought was that it would be a catalyst, the beautification of the waterfront, taking it back, which was, as you remember as a child, piles of scrap. And, I think the truckers used to call us on their CBs in the old days either Rust City or Junk City, pulling into Junk City, because as they would be coming from Chicago across 65, they would see the piles of stuff. And so we had to take back those leases. We didn't renew many of them. A few were owned outright. We had to buy those. And ultimately, with the waterfront and the baseball park and then the hundreds of millions of dollars of investment that surround this park, it turned out to be quite a success. Again, the issue was family, affordable fun, at least from my perspective.
And you mentioned, obviously, being at Cardinal Stadium, the team started back up. Baseball came back in 1982, really thriving out there, even as they were sharing it with University of Louisville football. But then there was kind of a fairly long fight, or I don't know if it was a fight, but a push to get U of L football its own stadium. That happened. It opened in 1998. And then maybe that ended up sort of being the opportunity for a reason for baseball to move. I know in reading, the Redbirds, I think, had their lowest attendance since they had come back in 1996. And so it was kind of like, okay, U of L football is getting their stadium. We need something better than this, as you mentioned, a facility that wasn't necessarily the best suited for baseball. So either wanted something better there or a lot of improvements there, or to move. And I know you obviously had this in mind. And just take us back to that, because I know there were some people that thought, well, why don't we just stay put or have the team stay put and put some money into that facility and make it better?
Yeah, renovate the old Cardinal Stadium. But, believe it or not, Joe Paterno and the Penn State Nittany Lions played in that old Cardinal Fairgrounds Stadium, as did Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, I was there on the sidelines seeing that huge Longhorn come out as we were getting beat by Texas. And
probably appropriate for a Longhorn to be there, though, because cattle.
So the bottom line was A-Ray Smith was just a phenomenal owner and a marketer's genius, and he took this community by storm. And you're right, we broke every freaking record that could be broken in terms of the number of folks showing up. And then it began to wane. Heck, I remember going out when Valley Sports won the Little League championship. We were out there at the fairgrounds, at the Cardinal Stadium, etc. But he kept pushing for his own place. What really, in my judgment, made the most sense and what certainly got my attention and gave credibility to the fact that this team, now the Bats, would be here for a long, long time, was local ownership. I mean, A-Ray's a wonderful guy, and he did wonderful things, and you got to tip your hat to the visionary guy that he was. But without the folks who jumped in, the Ulmer family, the Hilrich family,
sure.
The Glasscock family, the Musselman family. There are a lot of local names that and probably others who for whatever don't come to mind. When they came into my office and said, we're buying the team and we're here for the duration. So whatever is built, it's going to be a part of the fabric of this community. It's not some, outside owner who's going to just sort of pass through, take advantage of the city and keep passing on through. That made a big difference. And local ownership, it was the same way with the Kentucky Colonels. I mean, the fact that John Y. and Ellie and that group, Brown, owned the Colonels and, played at the Armory, and then they played at Freedom Hall. Local ownership made all the difference in the world. And if John Y., instead of selling Artis Gilmore and selling Dan Issel, and if he'd have put the $3 million up, which is what it cost to go in the NBA,
man, things could have been very different.
I mean, we're talking a couple of $1 billion franchises. That's
no
what
doubt.
the sales are going at. And so, the fact that local ownership makes all the difference. In that case, unfortunately, it didn't play out. In this case, the fact that local ownership still has a piece of this action here, but also has collaborated, if you will, with an organization that has great respect around the country, continues the Louisville Bats success.
It certainly has.
I was here when Prime was the leadoff batter for the Bats. I guess maybe it was the Redbirds at that time. Might have been.
No, it was the River Bats. The River Bats.
River Bats. Yeah. I remember when Deion Sanders was the leadoff batter for one of the first games we had here.
Scored the first River Bats run in this ballpark. It's
there you go.
The trivia question from that game in 2000, as we talked about. Was there, the Fair Board had put some money into looking at updating their facility, and I think wrote down some numbers, but ended up being, I think the Fair Board ended up coming up with a plan that they were going to have $20 million over several years to upgrade their facility, to try to add suites and make it more baseball-centric and maybe natural grass. Obviously, there was the AstroTurf over there and everything as well. And then this place, the estimates were at the time around $25 million. I think it ended up being around that to get it built all in, buying the land and buying the land from the businesses, as you talked about. But was that kind of like this is a no-brainer when it's, say only $5 million. I know that's a lot of money, but when you're thinking long-term for decades down the road, it doesn't really seem like that much more to build a whole new place rather than renovating at the old site.
Yeah, and yes to that question, and also we had the leg up in the sense that we could control this. The Fairgrounds does a wonderful job in this community in so many ways. But they were in control. And, if there was something going on out at the Cardinal Stadium, there was something going on and you couldn't play or you couldn't use it. And here we could have our own facility. Here we could have state-of-the-art, which, as I remember, was selected by some national organization as the best designed ballpark in America. This gave us an opportunity to and to have it downtown. To join, much like when I worked with the state to build the KFC Yum Center, to have it downtown and to create the energy and, most importantly, the synergy around a facility like this, a facility like the KFC Yum Center, made all the difference in the world.
Don't want to get too much into politics, but curious. So there was the football stadium just built, L&N Stadium as it is now. The Louisville football stadium opened in 1998. I was reading that there were a few aldermen who were really pushing a study of a downtown arena, which we know came years later, ended up being the Yum Center. At the time, were you battling any sort of and proponents of this place, were you battling any sort of stadium fatigue because there had been one that just went up and they were talking about an arena moving downtown? Was that an issue at the time?
It wasn't stadium fatigue as much as you're going to put it where?
Sure.
I mean, it's one thing for me to drive down Main Street today and look left and look right and see the things that are happening. Back then, 25 years ago, give or take, it was a pretty rough area with very little going on. And, you had to have the vision thing. I go back to that again. You had to realize that if this happened, then that would happen. And if that happened, then this would happen. And it just seemed the perfect location to be able to create the energy. And so it wasn't so much fatigue, although we worked our rear ends off to get that new Cardinal Stadium built.
Yeah.
We probably sold the naming rights too inexpensively, if I'm trying to be kind, to that at the time. The city put money in to help. The county, we had a city and a county at that time. Right. They put money in. Of course, Brereton Jones, who was the governor at that time, it was a brownfield site that gosh knows what was in the dirt, and I don't want to know. But so we had to remediate that accordingly. And we had to do the same thing here, by the way. You can imagine a scrapyard,
no doubt,
with all the stuff that they'd cut up and smashed and whatever. I mean, there was lots of oil and stuff like that in the ground. But it wasn't fatigue. It was more people thought that I was wrong. Fortunately, not many, but some people thought I was wrong in the location. I kept pushing it because I was excited about replicating Camden Yards and using the trolley barn to go in. And people kept saying, there's nothing down there. No one will come there. Your parking lot's too small. God, I took a lot of heat on the size of the parking lot. I mean, God bless Louisville. Everybody wants to be parked right next to the door.
That's right.
And so And when we talked about parking on the street, you know, at least you didn't, when you drove through into the fairgrounds, you didn't have to pay the parking or the parking attendant. So that's basically what it was.
What about you mentioned the local ownership of the Redbirds at that time? Were they on board with moving down here?
Oh yeah,
was that something they wanted?
Yeah, you know, when we laid it out and when I talked to them about what we had seen and they were visionaries, those guys, and they were guys. They were visionaries with me and could see where their opportunities could work well. They were tough negotiators. The lease payment that we have, and I suspect they still receive from the ownership, I needed a certain amount of money to cover the bonds because we were floating bonds, and you got to pay the debt on those bonds. And they were willing to do just that. And that gave us an opportunity. Interestingly enough, when we received the money, rather than putting it into the general fund, we put it into the budget of the Downtown Development Corporation to allow them to work through so many of the other aspects to bring success and excitement to the downtown. So they were very willing to work with us. Tough, did I say tough negotiators?
Yeah.
They were tough negotiators, But I guess I dealt with the late Dan Ulmer and his son Gary the most in terms of the negotiations. But they were fair, and they got it that if we located here at this location, there would be a significant ripple effect in a very positive way for the community, and it worked out well. And then, we put Pee Wee Reese in the front statue, and we put Paul Hornung in the back statue, and it's pretty exciting times.
Really cool way to incorporate some key sports history.
Superstars, you betcha.
Reading at the time, and maybe this has been a knock on the city a little bit, in that things can take some time here. This happened. I know you had the thought in the 80s, but this really happened relatively quickly. It seemed like Louisville moving to their new stadium that opened in 1998. That 96 season, attendance was way down, and it seemed like momentum built for change on the professional baseball side as well. And it seems like it really hit, maybe 96-ish. And then in 2000, this place was opening. It actually seemed to move along pretty quickly.
Well, that's because we did a lot of spade work.
Right.
I mean, to get the ownership, to get the Brenly Hardy folks to be willing to relocate at a price that they were willing to accept, because we weren't condemning anything. This was not a condemnation. This was an arm's length purchase, excuse me, because of the private aspect of what was going to be here. If you're going to have this as an open, free park, then we could have condemned. We would have gotten the property, and the only argument would be in court, how much is it worth? This was not that kind of situation. Sure. So we spent an enormous amount of time with Jane Hardy and the folks at Brenly Hardy. And to tell you, we spent an enormous amount of time with the family that owned the Louisville Scrap is putting it lightly. I mean, it was a difficult negotiations. As I told you, we wanted them to go downriver on the other side of the lock and dam. The problem was, in terms of barge loading and unloading, was the fluctuation of the height of the water, because when the dam opened up, it went up and went down. They wanted to go going upriver, which they ultimately did. There were a lot of folks that didn't want that to occur. They're basically across from the soccer fields that I built on top of the landfill that was there, and so yes, it seems like it went fast, but we were doing all this work just behind the scenes, because if you're going to stand up and you're going to say we're going forward to do this, and you don't own the land and you don't own the building and you got to do all that, people's attention span is pretty short in this day and age, and even then. So we spent an enormous number of months and years getting that squared away. We had to help Brenly Hardy relocate, as well as buy the property. And so it just took a lot of time. But I could understand where the average folk looking at the newspaper clippings and seeing, we announced it here, and we spent a lot of time before we announced it.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going on in the background. Reading newspaper clippings, you were hoping to have it open for the 1999 season. Was it just, the normal kind of construction stuff that pushed it back a year?
From what I remember, that there wasn't anything other than that kind of an issue. But I really don't. I'm not sure I remember exactly why. But yeah, we were a little late. I do remember that. We were a little late. I think we opened in the fall. Was it the fall or the spring?
April of 2000. Right. So,
and we broke ground in the fall of 98.
Yeah, I think it was 98. I don't know exactly when. I know
I think it was the fall.
Talking to Gary Ulmer, did a podcast episode with him a few years ago, and this was a part of it as well. The move.
Sure.
He mentioned that.
Did he say I was a tough negotiator?
Yeah, I think you both are in agreement there. But he mentioned that even in 2000, with just when you're building a place like this, stuff just keeps coming up, and it's like, oh, we got to finish that, whatever the case may be. He said, I don't remember who he said, but there were people saying, hey, why don't you just push back the opening to the middle of the season. Indianapolis had opened their new ballpark in July of '96, so right out of the All-Star break, and people were telling him, like, hey, why don't you just push it back there and we can get it all the way done? And he was emphatic, no, we've got to be ready for the opener. Do you remember any of that at all in 2000? I know you were not in office then, but do you remember any of that going on?
I remember bumping into Gary at the Y, and he was, we were both working out, and he was saying things like, we got to get this thing done. It's really important to us. But I don't remember the specifics at that point. They were awfully kind to invite me back to throw out the first ball with the governor and the mayor at that time. And I appreciated that, but they were so committed to making this happen, so committed.
This is a much more like baseball side thing, but do you remember at that time there was some shuffling in terms of affiliates? The team had been with the Cardinals since it had started.
Went to Milwaukee for a while.
Yeah, the Brewers in '98 and '99, and then ultimately with the Reds. And it worked out perfectly because it coincided with the ballpark opening. I've been with the Reds since 2000. But, there was some shuffling in terms of major league affiliates. Was that something that ever came up as these discussions and trying to get this place being built was ongoing? Was that something you remember hearing about a little bit?
I definitely remember hearing about the opportunities fans here would have to be able to watch the younger players, the newer players at work, and then be able to go up 71 and watch them in the major leagues. I can also remember often when I was here at a ballpark on the weekends meeting people from Cincinnati who came down to do just that, to be able to see a young player that they'd heard great things about. So the synergy between the two cities and the major league and the AAA was Corky was good.
Yeah.
He was good as a young guy. He was good as an old guy. But they didn't necessarily come down to see him as much as they came down to see this kid, that pitcher, or that fielder. And the connection to Cincinnati, I thought, was a brilliant move. I don't know how that came about and who negotiated that deal, but it enhanced the opportunity for real baseball fans to appreciate what was going on here. And what I remember hearing all the time from the Cincinnati folks who would come down to, or the Northern Kentucky folks who would come down to watch the team, was what a jewel box baseball park we had, and how they felt like they were just on top of the players compared to Great American Ballpark, and how fortunate we were to have such a unique setting for baseball.
It's still holding up today. Want to ask you about the media at the time. Seemed like most of reading Billy Reed had a column, was really on board. He was rest in peace, a great supporter of this team. Pat Forty in his sports column in the Courier-Journal was, there had been an event here to sort of introduce the site and where it was going to be, was on board, thought it was a great idea. Bob Hill, more on the less sports side, was at first maybe not on board, or I don't know that he wasn't ever on board. He was on board, but he just didn't think this place. I was reading a column from I think '96 sometime, and he didn't think it was going to be realistic to move down here, and obviously it ended up being. But it seemed like most of the media was pretty on board with it, and I would imagine that's a big help in shaping people's opinions.
Yeah, no question. I mean, it gave me a base upon which to say to folks who were naysayers that the sports community, in terms of the media, were very positive. It also made it easier for them. I mean, let's put it
right.
The TV stations were all downtown. The Courier-Journal was downtown. Everybody could flow over here easily, catch a few innings, have it for the 6 or for the 11 o'clock news, and back when we had a really active newspaper, you could I think their cutoff time was late in the afternoon, early evening. Now it's like 2:30, 3 o'clock. It's a whole different world. But the sports guys were really excited about it. Bob Hill's friend, but he is a curmudgeon in so many ways. I mean, I love the guy, but he is a curmudgeon, and somebody had to join in on the drumbeat that says, you're going to locate it where? I mean, do you realize that's a scrapyard and that's a junkie this and a junkie that? Yeah, I get it, but you know, it's you got to have a dream, you got to have a vision, and you got to be willing to articulate it clear enough so that folks, including the media, understand what could ultimately come. And as I said to you earlier, had it been a failure, they would have strung me up, but it wasn't. It was a great success, and continues to be a success, and therefore we were smart.
Genius.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, it has been incredible. And as someone that has, lived in this city most of my life, with the exception of being away for college, do you think, I've often asked this to various people, I'll ask you, this place is here. I don't know that the KFC Yum Center is here where it is now without Louisville Slugger Field being here.
Well, let me just say that there were people who were not in favor of the KFC Yum Center being downtown.
Sure.
Like most of the U of L leadership.
Right.
And as a result, when I would be discussing it with the athletic director or the then president, I would point to the success of this facility and the synergy of what it had created around it to say, come on, guys, we had two different locations for the KFC Yum Center. One was the old water company block, and the other was where it is located now. And there was a strong drumbeat at the university to continue it out at Freedom Hall, or as I used to call it, you remember the circle around it? I used to call it the circle of chumps. Because you get on that circle.
Ring Road, baby.
Ring Road.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're sitting there for a while.
I called it the circle of chumps. And I kept saying, that you won't ever have to be doing that. Because there's plenty of parking in the downtown, And if you locate it, look what happened over at the baseball park. Look how it created a ripple effect that was so positive. And the same thing will happen if you locate here. And ultimately, they agreed. It wasn't easy, let me just say that. Or as Rick Pitino said to me as we were cutting the ribbon, he turned to me and he said, Mayor, I never thought you could pull this off. I said, Coach, oh ye of little faith.
Little did they know. That's great stuff. So April 12th, 2000 was opening night here. You, as mentioned, weren't in office then, but I know you were here, and that had to be a special night just to see it all come together in this place, Pat.
It was incredible. Paul Patton, who was governor at the time, called me up and he said, I'm not coming if you're not invited. And he said, I want you on the mound with me because we did this thing. We started it together. And I looked around that crowd, and, I really teared up. It was a dream come true for me, and it wasn't easy. I think I've made that clear to your listeners.
That's right.
It wasn't easy with the scrapyard and with Brinley Hardy and with some naysayers about this location, but we did it, and ultimately it was successful, and the ripple effect around it has been positive, and it did give me an opportunity to highlight to the University of Louisville folks the success of being downtown as we pitched to them the location of the KFC Yum Center.
You told me a story before we started, and I'll see if you want to tell it here, about a trip to Cleveland and that being an inspiration for getting a city benefit here with the ballpark as well.
Yeah, I had a good friend who was a friend of the mayor of Baltimore, William Donald Schaefer. He's the guy that did the Baltimore Harbor, and he was a real visionary and was the senior mayor in America. I mean, everybody knew he was the dean. And my friend in Baltimore said, you want to come spend a day with him and just sort of shadow him. This was between once I was elected and before I took office, so that you could sort of see what a big-time mayor in a big-time city is all about.
Well, you told us that story on the Cleveland story.
I'm sorry.
About you went to Cleveland, Jacobs Field had just opened, and were entertained there, and that inspired something.
Yeah, that's a great. There was a mayor's meeting in Cleveland. I'm sorry, you're right. I'd done the other one already. There was a mayor's meeting in Cleveland, and the mayor of Cleveland, a guy named Mike White, took us all to the newly opened Jacobs Field. And we were in a box at the end of there were boxes much like we have here that went east and west, and he was at the end in a big, big box. And I was sitting with him at the game, and I said, what's the deal? This is really neat. And he said, well, when I negotiated the deal with the family, I demanded, I remember him using that word, I demanded a box for the city. So this is the mayor's box. And I said, oh, it's great. That's great. So when I'm negotiating to build this here in Louisville, and I'm negotiating with the late Dan Ulmer and his son Gary, I said, in Cleveland they got this, and I'd like to have a box for the city. And they said, okay, that's fine. That's good. So a couple years later, I'm at another meeting, and Mike White is no longer the mayor of Cleveland, but I'm sitting next to the new mayor of Cleveland, and I was telling her how this story went about, and as a result, I want to thank you because it gave us an opportunity to have a box for the city. To which she looked at me and she said, we don't have any box here. And I said, well, we were over there on the, over at the end. She said, that's a rental box. We don't have a box in the city. So I told the Ulmers that I thought they did, that I didn't want them to think I'd snookered them. But that is a story that is true, and we got a box for the city as a result.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
It really is a great story. The mayor of Cleveland doing some nice work to entertain everyone there.
No question.
Well, I guess want to kind of wrap it up. Really appreciate your time and doing this, but this place downtown, the KFC Yum Center, downtown later, Waterfront Park, and just a lot of the efforts that have really revitalized this area. Is that maybe, I know this is a loaded question because you did it for a long time, but is that among the things you're most proud of in terms of your legacy of mayor of the city?
When people approach me and say, you did a great job, man, when you were mayor. I was mayor for over 2 decades. So most folks do what you just did. They look at the brick and mortar.
Sure.
Thanks for expanding the airport. Gosh, we've got more passenger service. Look what UPS has done with the jobs. Look at the companies that came in to support UPS. Thanks what you did downtown with the baseball park, with the KFC. All those kinds of brick and mortar things. I'm proud of them all. But or going out River Road to what was a landfill that's now a soccer field.
Sure.
Or go down a little further when I gave the old dump to the Waterfront Botanical Gardens, and they have done a magnificent thing. So everybody wants to look at brick and mortar. From my perspective, I think what I take the most pride in is the atmosphere of my hometown. When I took office in January 1 of '86, we were a glass half empty kind of city. We were down on ourselves. We didn't think we could compete. There just was no energy. And I think what I was able to do is create pride and excitement and a feeling of the glass half full. And that then leads to a new baseball park, a new this, a new that, a waterfront expansion, etc. And so I think it's more the intangible than the brick and mortar stuff that I personally take pride in.
That's great, and I think that's something that endures to this day. Really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for stopping in. It's been really fun, and just the perfect person to talk to for this. So much great insight, and cannot thank you enough for spending some time.
Thanks, Nick. It's a great trip down memory lane. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
All right, that was Jerry Abramson. A great episode there. So much great insight into what it took to eventually get enough support to make this place happen, and having to sort of maneuver with businesses here and make deals and everything that went into it. A really cool peek behind the curtain about some of the nuts and bolts of getting this place to become a reality, and also about some of the goals that were in his mind as this place was forming and wanting it to be affordable, and a lot of the inspirations from around the country. Just a really, really neat conversation with Mayor Abramson. Great insight into here at Louisville Slugger Field. Thanks so much for being with us. However you have found this episode of the podcast, a special 25th anniversary of Louisville Slugger Field edition, available on YouTube, SoundCloud, and many other places. We thank you for dialing us in, or perhaps you're tuned in during a rain delay. However it may be, we thank you so much. Hopefully we'll be back next time with one in the not-too-distant future. Until then, my name's Nick Curran. This has been the Louisville Bats Podcast. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll catch you again next time.